One of the more intelligent places to start when looking at the phenomena of homelessness in the fifth wealthiest county by median income in the United States relative to other counties, other states, other places in the world that experience far less homelessness per capita than we do here in Marin, is how did we pull it off? How did we work together as state and local officials, as builders, as real estate agents, bankers, as the general public? How did we go from a county that 40 years ago didn't have homelessness as an issue to a county where every decade in the last 40 years, for the last 4 decades, we have had more homelessness and then more homelessness than the decade before that? How did we do that as a county? Now, it's worth noting in any dynamic, in any cultural dynamic, there are 3 players. There's the initiator, there's the recipient, and there's the witness or the audience. So different policies, different laws, different behaviors were done by local building departments, by local governments, by landlords, by builders, by by banks. Different things were done. They had an impact. They were done to a group of people, and then everyone watched. And in a power dynamic, you have the initiator, the giver of the dynamic, the receiver of the dynamic, but you also have the vast majority are the witness. Now, as a witness, you can protest or intervene, or you can be passively silent, or you can cheer on the different protocols that you're witnessing. But the witnesses have strength in numbers. The witnesses have the power. They have the ability in a democracy, whether or not they have the willingness to respond. The witnesses always hold the power in a dynamic. Because if anyone can get away with something in a sociopathic environment of scarcity, fear, pain, and scarcity, there's not enough, so I'm going to take more for me, and I'm going to exploit or take from these people. If the majority stands by as silent witnesses, as passive witnesses, unwilling to vote, to participate, to respond, the dynamic continues. Whether it's dirty cops or corrupt politicians or embezzling financial institutions or, people at the top of the family system or pedophilic priests, there's a certain amount of abusive and destructive behavior that will go on as long as the witnesses tolerate it, which means that for 4 decades, certain parts of Marin County have done a variety of things that have led to increased levels of homelessness. And more members of Marin County have found themselves both homeless and even more afraid of being homeless. And the majority of Marin, the silent witness, has been largely passive. The witnesses have all of the power in a dynamic such as this, but the witnesses are busy. They're getting on with their lives. They're dissociating from the biggest humanitarian crisis in Marin. Now, before we get lost, because anytime you have a status quo, a situation, one of the reasons that the status quo has as much momentum, even if it's unintelligent, because many status quos are absolutely absurd. You can't find a single sane person who can advocate, gee, we really need more homelessness. We really need higher building prices. We need more violence or wildfires. I mean, you can't find a single sane person to advocate for these outcomes. But why do the protocols that lead to the outcomes continue, even when the outcomes ensure that every single person wins, or loses in that dynamic? Everyone loses when we have more homelessness. The homeless people lose. The people afraid of losing their homes lose. The governments lose. The businesses lose. The people who drive by looking at more and more homeless people lose. Health care providers lose. Hospitals lose. Fire departments lose. Everyone loses when homelessness per 1,000 people goes up. And it's been going up for 40 years. So when everyone has participated, either as an initiator of the protocols that lead to homelessness, as a receiver, a passive receiver, someone willing to accept inhumane eviction from a safe legal place to sleep. And when everyone has done nothing, we can say that this is our problem. Because I travel around the world, and one of the most interesting things for me personally, and one of the reasons that I decided to take this on as both a curiosity, how is it that I see more homeless people in Marin when I get home from my travels than I do in, say, Thailand? $350 a month average income. I think it's $11,000 a month average income, or $14,000 in Marin. 300, 11,000. We can't house our people? Are you nuts? This is insane. And so how do we pull it off? Like, how do we manage as initiators, as recipients, and as witnesses? How did we pull homelessness off in Marin? Well, the cover of my book, Homeless in Marin, complete nonprofit project. The books are free. The time I donated writing them, free. I don't think it's too much to ask, if one is an American in the 5th wealthiest county in the country, that people in the county have a safe, legal place to sleep. I don't care if it's a tent, a van, a teepee. You see, we tend to think of ourselves as being so progressive. But 500 years ago, there was not a single homeless person in Marin. 500 years ago, if you look at the native history in Marin, people were housed. Oh, they didn't have mansions. They weren't using too much water. They weren't generating 1,000 tons of garbage over the span of a lifespan. They weren't generating 1,500 metric tons of CO2 per person. They had homes, though. The Miwok had homes in Marin that were more sustainable, didn't impact people's views, right? Easier to put out in a fire. They were better on every metric of the environment, They had no mortgages. Now, if the Miwok were alive today in Marin, every one of them would be illegal for living sustainably on local land. It is illegal. I called, because I own land in Marin County, I called Marin County and I asked if I had permission to camp on my own undeveloped land. No, says Marin County, that is illegal. So that right that the Miwok had 500 years to erect shelter is illegal now. So you start to see how we're creating more homelessness than I see in Thailand. When I was on the island of Palawan in the Philippines, I wandered into the back garden on a large, tropical forest of a family of 8. Their house cost $100 in nails plus bamboo, and they built it together with no mortgage, 200 square feet, 8 people. They were happier, more relaxed than me or you. They had no noise pollution, no dopamine addiction to their phones. Their cost of housing, 100% biodegradable, no permit, $100 in nails every 8 years. They would be evicted in every city and county in Marin on the basis of 1,000 separate laws. So if 1,000 separate laws would take every member of the Miwok tribe and turn them into criminals today, we start to see, we're spending public money to create homelessness. So how do we do it? So what's our strategy? How do we, in Marin, create more homelessness decade after decade after decade? Now, if you look at the cover of the book here and look at the key graph, one of the obvious things that strikes you is the divergence of the increase of 3/5 of Marin residents and their income. So the income level is going up very slowly for 3/5 of Marin residents. Now, the income is going up very highly for 2/5 of Marin residents. But the housing price is going up very highly for everyone. Now, you don't have to be particularly knowledgeable in mathematics to understand that in the next 10 years, at our current trajectory, we will have created even more homelessness than we created the last decade, just as we've done for the last 40 years. This is not a new equation. This graph says it all. Housing prices are increasing faster than the rate of 3/5 of Marin residents. Now, that's how we did it, right? That's obvious, right? Now, just to do a little thought experiment, if we were to take you, the witness, the building official, those of us who are nicely housed in our $1 million homes, and we raised the price of each Marin home to $1 billion, let's just say 100 million. 100 million. We have our $1 million homes. We raised the price to 100 million, but we don't do anything with our salary. Or let's just say we give ourselves a 10 or 20% raise, right? Because the income is not staying totally flat. But we give ourselves a 10 to 20% raise. Well done. And then we increase the cost of our homes by $100 million. Now, You then have to increase your mortgages roughly 100 times. And what happens to homelessness next year? How many of you survive the $100 million mortgage? You're working hard. You're maybe got 2 jobs. You got that raise. But it doesn't cover the fact that home prices are going up much faster than your income. Well, that's the experience of 3/5 of the Marin population who cannot afford affordable housing. What is affordable housing in Marin? Well, it's very basic. If you buy the cheapest piece of land that you can find anywhere in the county, and you build the smallest house that they will allow. On my land, it's 1,200 square feet. You want to build a 200 square feet house like the, those lovely family in Palawan? You are not allowed. It is illegal to build a 200 square foot house. You want to gather rainwater? That's illegal too. You want to use a composting toilet? That's illegal. There are 1,000 laws between you and that $100 bamboo biodegradable hut. There are 1,000 laws between each one of us and the right to do what the Miwok did in the same area 500 years ago with no permit. And who's paying for all of that enforcement? Some of the highest property taxes in the world are paying for that enforcement. They paid for the laws to be written. They paid for the salaries of every building official in every city in Marin, Mill Valley, Tiburon. They're paying for every police car to come out and escort people off of their own land for failing one of more than 1,000 laws. I had a client call me up from Mill Valley desperate because he wasn't allowed to get an occupant permit in his house. So what was his crime? His crime was that he hadn't submitted an irrigation design to scale to MMWD for a landscape he hadn't done yet. The plants weren't in, but they wanted the drawing of what he would do, or he couldn't move into his house. So I call up MMWD. I have someone who wants me to hurry up and draw up a plan. I said, what do I have to do to get this person into his house? They said, the 2 employees that you need to talk with are on vacation. So a guy can't move into his house because he doesn't have a drawing. Now, I explained to him, this is a very simple irrigation plan. We could put it in a couple of hours. Just half a gallon per hour emitters. It's no big deal. But they wanted 3 sets of drawings. They wanted it to scale. I said, you know what? You're going to have to pay me $700 to do the drawing for a $500 irrigation system. It would be easier, more fun and satisfying to put in the irrigation than to draw it. But who cares about sanity when MMWD, whose employees are on vacation, has to get its drawing to scale of a drip system? That's the insanity we're in today. So who do you think pays that $700 in the end? The future buyer of the home. So if you follow every law, buy the cheapest land, build the smallest house, follow the 1,000 codes, connect to all of the monopolies, the sewer department, the water department, you don't have choice. You do not have choice. Why? Because the choice has been taken. The Miwok have choice. Other people around the world have choice. It's just you don't have choice. Why not? Because you gave it up. The silent majority working feverishly to pay a large portion of their salary to housing didn't have time to protect their rights. And the building departments and the banks and the realtors and the builders and the tax collectors, every single one of them makes more money when your house price goes up. Realtors make more money on commission when more expensive houses sell. Architects make more money when more expensive homes are built. Architects make more money when the plans are so difficult to draw that, as someone who's built multiple homes in other states that are more intelligent than California, meaning they get it done faster, more reasonably, with better service, at 1/10 the price. That's called intelligence. When you can profitably do a 10 times better job for less money, that's intelligence. So I've built homes in intelligent parts of the country. Marin is not. It's proud of its bureaucracy. One of the employees, the old road department supervisor, was retiring to get out of Marin. And I asked him, where's he moving? And he said, I made a clear point to not move to California because I want to build my retirement home. And he said, I have seen, this is the road department supervisor, who's watched decades of stupidity at every level of Marin County, planning, community development, etc. He said, because he knows what he's doing, right? He's worked in the system. He said, first of all, I went right over the California border. Very important. And he said, having watched the nightmare that is Marin County, he wouldn't buy the land over the state until he talked with the local building officials in the next state. And he said, I bought the land when I realized these were friendly, sane people who would give me 10 times better service than I was able to provide and had anything to do with in Marin County. So is that a testament to intelligence, to humanity, to sanity? No, it is a testament to a profound level of cruelty towards the most vulnerable people who have had every legal means cut off with public money to benefit the bankers who make better loan fees, the architects who make better architect fees, the builders who make better building fees, the realtors who make better real estate fees, the building department. I've had clients as a landscape designer and installer who, of course, I talk with them after they've gone through the building department. Now, this is really sad, in my opinion. Builders and contractors know exactly what I'm talking about. Why aren't they on this video? That's an important question. Fear, that's why. Every single one of them that will complain and tell you horror stories of millions of dollars of waste, of ruined marriages, of destroyed lives, their own and those of their clients, because of the cruelty and sociopathic nature of our local friendly government, will not go on camera unless they are retired and never going to get another permit out of Marin. Why? Because they are afraid of retribution. They're afraid of public money and public office being used to punish and harass whistleblowers. That's why the majority is silent. You have a tyranny of control, so the majority is silent. Now, I talk with client after client. Now, to be fair, there is about 10% of my clients that have had a reasonably good experience. They're not upset. But 80% of my clients who have dealt with any building department in Marin are highly motivated to avoid a second experience. To such an extent, see, here's when corruption begins to collapse on itself. 50% of all the work done in Marin, by Marin County's own study, is done without a permit. Why? Because it's easy and fun and helpful to deal with the local permitting agencies? No. Because people would rather risk punishment, double permit fees are one of the punishments, than actually go through the torment of being harassed by their own public officials into doing something worse, slower, and at higher expense, just to meet codes that in many cases do not actually benefit someone. You know, to give an example, you talk with neighbor A, they want more privacy. You talk with neighbor B, they want more privacy. So, no problem, right? You build a 8-foot fence between the neighbors. Oh, there's a huge problem. Marin County won't hear of it, right? I thought you were there to help these people, not get in their way. No, they don't care about this neighbor and this neighbor. They care about their codes, and they care about their permit fees to pay their salaries. They don't actually care if two people lose who are paying their salaries with high tax dollars. They just want to follow the code and get paid. It's just that, as everyone knows in any bureaucracy, particularly a monopoly, which is what PG&E is, which is what MMWD is, which is what your local sewer department is, and your local building department would have a fit rather than let 5 or 6 permit processing agencies come in and compete to see who could follow the codes but get a building permit approved faster and cheaper than any one of these building departments can do. They will have a fit at free market competition, because the Miwok had free market competition. If they were the first one to get the bark to arrange their little structure, the first one to find the place for their little, igloo and adobe and this and that. Well, first come, first serve. You work faster, you get your little hut faster. They had a free market economy, not Marin. Marin is monopoly upon monopoly upon monopoly, structured around more than 1,000 separate laws. Now, every one of these laws in Marin increased the cost of housing. Oh, your water line is not quite big enough to spray the fire sprinklers we just mandated you to install. And so that'll be another $25,000 to make your water line 1 inch rather than 3/4. Well, I don't have $25,000 at the moment. Well, we're going to hold this up and hold that up, and we won't give you a permit, we won't do this until you come up with $25,000. Okay, well, you've just very nicely increased the cost of that home by $25,000. That's just one of 1,000 different laws. Now, if they keep this up, homes will go to 100 million. Now, they won't go that fast because they wouldn't have any revenue if everyone was bankrupt. They'll go as much as they possibly can and still have buyers for the home. And in a place like Marin, that's drawing some of the smartest people from around the world to work in tech. The fact that this is displacing hairdressers, entrepreneurs, artists, the elderly, young children out of college, single mothers, the fact that these people are being displaced in higher and higher numbers every single year in Marin is of no matter. Why? Because richer people are being imported to work in tech to bid up the homes. And the architects, the real estate agents, the landscapers. I make tons of money in Marin. The landscapers, the building department, the tax collectors, all of these people make money on the increased prices that drive a higher and higher percentage of local residents, people who were born here, your grocery clerks, your hairdresser, your baker. They have to drive farther and farther afield. 2-hour drive for my hairdresser to come in to make $14 an hour cutting hair. She can't afford a home in Marin because if you do the very, very, very skimpiest, cheapest job within the legal mandate of any city in Marin, the bill will come out to more than $650,000. $650,000 is low-cost housing in Marin County. $100 of nails and free bamboo is low-cost housing on Palawan. $300 is a free, unpermitted, renovated addition on any of the islands in Thailand. $650,000. Now, is it a crime to be a baker or a hairdresser or a single mother? Is it a crime to be an artist? Because statistically speaking, none of those demographics can afford a $650,000 home. In fact, if you imported all of the nicely housed Thai or Filipinos into Marin, every single one of them would be homeless. Not because they don't know how to build, not because they don't want to take care of themselves, not because they're bad people, not because of a criminal history, but because, surprise, surprise, their lifestyle does not generate the $200,000 income required to qualify for a $650,000 home. That is not a surprise. This is basic mathematics. We are set in the next decade for the gap between 3/5 of the people in Marin and housing prices to get bigger. It's been getting bigger for 4 decades. It will get bigger next decade. So, how do we participate in the system? Mostly with passivity. Can you fault a tax collector whose job is to maximize tax revenue for acting in a way that increases housing prices, a big source of local tax revenue? Is that surprising? Can you fault an architect who gets paid a percentage of the project for wanting $1 million renovation? $1 million renovation instead of a $100 bamboo hut with nails? Now, we don't have to go all the way down to $100 in nails and some bamboo and a fully biodegradable house that is not hard to put out by the fire department, that doesn't block anyone's view, that is camouflaged so nicely that it fits right into the landscape, that doesn't require a mortgage and can allow an artist to bring life to a dying culture. It doesn't take that extreme. If we even made it legal. So what does it mean to make something legal? What does it mean to make low-cost housing legal? So we know how Marin has created an illegality. Marin has made low-cost housing illegal. How? 95% of every square foot of land in Marin County is illegal to build on. You take the entire millions upon millions of square foot of land in Marin County, and then you look at 95% of those square footage, and you say, I want to put a house here, I want to sleep here. Oh, we can't do that. That's parkland. That's wetland. That's farmland. That's too close to this. That's too close to that. That doesn't have a septic permit. That doesn't have water. That doesn't. You get finished with the long list of every way that every building department will inform you. You cannot sleep legally in here and here and here. And what's left? 5%. Seem a little excessive? 95% of the square feet in Marin is illegal to sleep on? Well, that's a start. If you really want to make low-cost housing illegal, just make artificial scarcity. What about tunneling under the mountain here and putting, hobbit? What about hobbit holes under public land in a tunnel? Oh, that's illegal too. What about that? Well, that's a military base. Well, that's too close to this. Well, that doesn't do this. Okay, so we've taken 100% of the land and we've reduced it down to 5%. Were the Miwok this dumb? Did they tell their people you can't sleep or breathe on 95% of their own land? Of course not. This is synthetic scarcity in a tremendous amount of space. You travel around the world and look at density and then come back to Marin. There's no one here. But it sure seems like we're scarce when 95% of every square foot in Marin cannot be slept on. So that's the step one. Now, step two, minimum square footage. This is an incredible, I don't know how anyone pulled this off. I went to the building department in Marin and I said, here's my land. I think I could live quite comfortably on 600 square feet. Well, they said, perhaps you could, but we're not going to let you build a 600 square foot house on your own land. I said, this is odd, because the water department is writing to me saying, could I use less water? A 600 square foot house uses less water than a 1,200 square foot house. The fire department is writing me saying, please, make your house less burnable. A 600 square foot house is easier to put out than a 1,200 square foot. The neighbors want more view. A 600 square foot house takes up less view than a 1,200 square foot. The neighbors want more parking and less cars. A 600 square foot house uses less cars than a 1,200 square foot house. The neighbors don't want the noise of construction. It takes half the time to build a 600 square foot than a 1,200 square foot. PG&E doesn't want me using any power. See, this is the hypocrisy and the joke that is the Marin housing experience. You first say, I'd like a solar panel without any power. And they say, no. We can't let you have freedom. The home of the free, the land of the brave. Forget it. You want to have your own solar power? Oh, we can't let you do that. You go to Marin MMWD. You say, I've got a dry creek running through my land that's polluting the bay. It's running topsoil into the bay. How about I harvest 50,000 gallons a year from that and reverse osmose it? Then you won't have to worry about all your water shortage. Oh, that can't be done, says MMWD. You've got to pay $50,000 to hook up to our system. To go to the sewer plant, you say you've got, you're over capacity and you're polluting the bay. How about I just put a composting toilet in that Bill Gates has spent $200 million engineering? All that money to save you the hassle of over polluting and all that. How about I just put that in my house? It'll save you all that hassle. No, says the sewer department, right? You've got to hook up to the sewer. Okay, so I've got to connect to the water, the power, and the sewer so that you can all send me letters telling me to use less power, conserve water, and that you don't know what you're doing. Make up your mind. So the 600 square foot house is better for the fire department. It's better for MMWD. It's better for PG&E. It's better for the neighbors. It's better for the view. You've got more trees and more garden. Everyone wins. So that's why it's illegal. You can go into community development, an agency that has not developed a single community in its existence. If it was called community slowdown and increased expenses, if it was called increased expenses for community, it would be a wonderfully named agency. You go into community development, you say, I want to build a 600 square foot house. It doesn't even get past that. They look it up on their law and they say, you have to build a 1,200 square foot house. But I don't want a 1,200 square foot. Well, tough. Get out of here. We don't have time for you. Go hire an architect. He understands us. You mean you've made so many codes that someone with basic common sense who wants to build their own home? No, you don't have a chance. Go spend $40,000 with an architect to learn how expensive we'll make your home, starting off by doubling its size by law. So this is how we made housing expensive in Marin. We passed 1,000 distinct laws. Now, some of them are lumped into, bunches like the Universal Building Code, the monopoly utility, connection. You do batches of them, but every single one of these laws increases the cost of housing. Now, they don't increase the cost of income, and that's the problem. If MMWD was busy passing laws that increased people's incomes at the same time that they were charging more and more money for water, there'd be no problem. But they're not doing that. They're taking public money to increase the public's expenses, but they're not taking public money to lower the public's expenses or to increase public income. So we have a gap. It's the most obvious thing in the world. This gap is going to get bigger and bigger for the next 50 years unless we reverse course. Now, people do not need government money to afford $650,000 on a hairdressing salary for a home. What they need is less public money being spent harassing people who want to safely live on their own land in a manner that they can afford. Why has no one at any of the building departments set up and approved and invited investment into pod hotels? Tokyo, one of the most expensive places in the world, can provide housing in Tokyo to people in pods, in sleeper pods, for $20 to $40 a night. Homeward Bound, the biggest nonprofit, with an annual budget of $9 million in public money, plus another $20 million of investments from nonprofit and public contributions in their land, manages to house homeless people, many of whom resent living there, for $300 a night. Now, if you don't count the value of the land and you don't count $20 million of investments, it looks like they're doing it for about the price of a pod hotel, $20 to $40 a night. But what universe are you in where $20 million of public investment doesn't count as anything? That's $300 a night per person. That's low-cost housing in a quasi-prison environment where you have curfews, you have this law, you have that law, and the homeless people that I talk to, some of them would rather sleep in a bush than be in that level of confinement. So we are spending billions of dollars over time of public money to create and enforce more than 1,000 laws that increase the price of housing but do not increase the price of income. We have already reached the point where 2/3 of Marin residents are anxious about their homes, are on the edge of eviction, or are living on the streets. 2/3 of the residents in Marin are not secure in their ability to afford market rates, which are not actually market rates. They are a monopoly created by monopoly after a monopoly after a monopoly, which the core is the building departments in every city and county, in the county and every city in Marin. They hold the stranglehold that will evict someone for camping on their land, that will arrest someone for sleeping in their car, that will refuse an occupancy permit to someone who doesn't have a drip irrigation plan drawn to scale in triplicates. That's why 95% of every square foot of area in Marin is off limits for the house that you can afford, for the house that your hairdresser can afford. It takes a phenomenal collusion over a great number of years to produce this effect, where American citizens cannot afford to legally live in their own county. But foreigners brought into tech companies with $300,000 salaries can afford the tremendous hike in prices engineered in the interest of bankers, contractors, real estate agents, architects, local building departments. And it's so bad at this point that despite the fact that none of my clients will come on camera, they've all told me stories, they just won't come on camera. Why? They tell me I might need a permit in the future. What does it mean when a people is so frightened of its own government and their inefficiency and incompetence, when they're so hobbled, like I nearly didn't get through that one. If it was any more, I'm not sure I could get through, right? I wouldn't have time if it took any more number of years to get through that permit. I don't want to risk it. I don't want to be singled out and targeted. That is a cult living in fear. We look over at Putin. That's a cult living in fear. And we look at Marin. It's a cult living in fear. There isn't a builder in this county who can't point to a dozen abuses of power, each of which hurt our homeless, the most vulnerable people in the country. 90% of the homeowners I talk to are disgusted with the waste and inefficiency of their experiences around permits, are stressed by the artificially inflated costs of having to apply so many laws that do not benefit them, whether they want to or not. It's not the home of the brave and the land of the free. It's the home of the cowed in the land of the indebted and homeless, with more on the way. Now, the answer is not $2.5 billion of public money to house the 2,000 and counting people in Marin with a $640,000 low-cost home. The answer is saving $50 million a year in public money enforcing unaffordable housing and letting people build a 200, 150 square foot, one-story structure any way they can afford until they get housed. When we can build a 150 to 250 square foot single-story structure the way they can 500 years ago in the Miwok tribe, the way they can on the island of Palawan, the way they can in Thailand any day of the week. And when Marin residents will speak up about the biggest humanitarian crisis that has been engineered with their own tax dollars, we might talk about freedom and bravery rather than cowardice, corruption, and fear. Every single one of us is putting up with an autocracy that is harming everyone, and it's wrong. Let's take a quick look at everyone harmed by making low-cost housing illegal. Artists. They've always needed lower rent in a cult that won't pay for their talent. Paris and all of its culture came from cheap rents a few hundred years ago with a lot of interesting artists. Now the artists can barely afford it. Artists fail, and with it, the aliveness of the culture. Artists lose, and the culture loses when it loses its artists. Entrepreneurs lose. There are so many. Imagine Steve Jobs. One of the reasons Marin prices are so high. Why? Because some kid played around in his garage. In a speculative venture. Imagine if he'd had to pay $2,500 a month for that garage and didn't have a chance to get Apple off the ground. When you make housing so expensive that you terrify people from being creative and inventive, creativity goes down, innovation goes down, and eventually the economy follows. We're riding on the coattails of innovation at a time when Marin had cheap rents and high creativity. Single mothers and their children lose. Now, what happens to a culture when abused spouses stick with abusive partners because they're afraid of being on the streets? You teach kids that your public officials will stand by, as it's usually a mother, is abused, but will evict you for not paying the high rents and mortgages your public officials have engineered without any regard for what 3/5 of Marin County residents are comfortable or able to pay. You create dependency. How does that lead to family cohesion? I really like to move out but I'm afraid of being on the street, so I'm going to stay home with my parents. Is that growth? Is that innovation? Is that life? Or is that fear engineered at our local building departments? This is wrong for artists. It's wrong for single mothers. It's wrong for college graduates. It's wrong for our elderly. It's wrong for our mentally and emotionally challenged. It's wrong for people with disabilities. It's wrong for minorities that already deal with income pressure and additional trauma. It's wrong to force people to build bigger houses when fire is an issue. It's wrong for the environment to force expenditure of materials when people can't even afford it, let alone the ecology. It's wrong to demand that people connect up to a monopoly reservoir that doesn't have enough water to serve them when they could collect gray water and use it themselves. It's just stupidity. It is a level of profound, unnecessary cruelty that is completely harming the vast majority of Marin residents. How do you think it is to socialize with 3/5 of the population who is in fear? Who's in the back of their mind, not fully there in the conversation because they're worried, can they live in the county they were born in? 72% of Marin homeless were long-term Marin residents. This is not a good direction for you, for me, and it certainly is not a good direction for our homeless. The answer is simple: less bureaucracy. I'd like to see every city and the county of Marin come up with 30 pre-approved 100 to 300 square foot single-story structures with pre-engineering that anyone can build in their backyard, number one. I'd like the laws removed that demand a minimum size of building. You're going to tell me in the land of the free, in the home of the brave, that I need to be babysit to build twice as big a house as I want, as my neighbors want? Because tax money is spent to gang up on individuals with the use of the police? We won't let you live on your own land unless you build a bigger house? This is absolute stupidity. And fortunately, since most of the world couldn't even afford a $100,000 home, fortunately, most of the world has not taken stupidity to this level. You cannot live in a small home by law. Absolute absurdity. And every single one of you who does nothing about this is the silent majority, the cowed majority, the apathetic majority that stands by the loss of life of every homeless resident in Marin. A homeless resident in Marin loses on average 6 hours of human life every 24 hours, reflected in early death statistics for people chronically homeless. 27 years of your life goes up in smoke. Business owners are hurt by this, but are you intelligent enough to ask your building department to change their laws? Or do you blame the single mother who can't buy a $650,000 home in a county that will not make a $100 tent legal? She wouldn't be on the street if we had humane policies. Where were you when those policies banning sleeping in a car were passed? It takes a tremendous amount of ignorance and sociopathic stupidity to pass these laws with no regard for people's ability to afford them. It takes a low level of self-esteem on the part of our many traumatized people being evicted to not fight for themselves. And it takes an absurd amount of sociopathic numbness to drive by homeless people day after day after day, decade after decade, and say, this is not anything to do with me. It's my county. It's my culture. These are my people in my land. I am sick returning home from intelligent cultures abroad to see more homeless people in my county, the fifth wealthiest county in one of the wealthiest countries in the world. This is stupidity. It is malevolent. And we are each a part of it. I wrote this book. I made this video. I did some research. It's a piece. If 1,000 people amongst all the Marin residents did the same, this could end in a year. And I ask you to do your part. I ask you to speak up. I ask you to make a video, write a letter. You can send it to me and I'll publish it. Come on camera. Speak your truth. Don't be cowed because your local government took so much from you and you're afraid they'll take it all. Don't be cowed. Ask for a little sanity. There's nothing particularly malevolent with people at the local building department. They're just as scared as the people they make risk losing their home. Because everyone loses when a majority of a population is at risk of losing their homes. Everyone loses in the big picture. The culture gets colder, more sociopathic. How can you call yourself a Christian when you drive by the meek and the needy talked about in your book and you don't do a goddamn thing? You blame the most vulnerable people. It's not humane. It's not intelligent. It's not Christian. It's not human. It is expedient. And we lose so much of who we could be when we take the expedient path, when we dissociate from our own people. This is not a culture we can export to the world. We will make everyone homeless. We have to fix our own minds, our own culture here. I'm not asking for a penny. I'm asking that less money be spent driving people out of their homes, making low-cost housing illegal. That can free up some money to give the city a raise. But does anyone at the city deserve a salary as long as the people they are responsible for stewarding are on the street? I don't think so. Stop spending so much money putting people on the street and give yourselves a raise, and we'll all be better off. And thank you.